Okay, good morning again. I will let everyone get their coffee. My name is Hans Nichols. I want to thank Eugene for that interesting conversation. And I'm going to invite my guest up here, Senator Gary Peters from Michigan. For your purposes, he's the head of the DSCC. Senator Peters, great to see you.
It's great to be with you. Great to be with you.
I'm going to do a quick prerogative here and say that 2 years ago, Senator Peters and I were in entirely different circumstances. We were doing a motorcycle trip around Michigan.
Right.
And let me clarify, I was in a rental car, a Kia Compact, and he was on the motorcycle. But, and I think some of your motorcycles then might have been a little bit interrupted by some of the Trump signs you saw in Upper Michigan.
Yeah.
And I just wanted your sort of temperature barometer read. Are there more Trump signs this year than 2 years ago, and then compare to 2016 and 2020?
Yeah, actually, we just completed the tour, which I do every year. Official business. We do meetings all across the state. But if you're going to go from point A to point B, do that on a motorcycle. And then I have guest riders, labor unions, veterans, others, 25, 30, 40 bikes that ride with me. But it does give you a sense of what's happening on the ground. And I'm happy to say that there are fewer Trump signs. They're there. You get a preponderance of Trump signs in northern Michigan, which is the redder areas of the state. But there were fewer signs this trip than I've seen the last 2 cycles.
That's interesting. What do you attribute that to?
Usually it's about enthusiasm. So there may not be that kind of enthusiasm, but I don't know if there's a real scientific basis on signs, so I want to be real careful about that. I'm a data guy. I don't know if that's not part of our equation, but anecdotal stuff.
They're traders making bets and moves off of your sign barometer.
Yeah, exactly. But it was interesting. So hopefully that's hopeful. Okay. And we're feeling it. I mean, I feel the energy on the ground. For this ticket, for Kamala Harris, it was quite apparent even in that ride. I mean, people were coming up to me saying, I'm just so excited, I'm getting engaged, and young people in particular.
So you want to grow your majority. Last year, you told me you're going to pick up 52 seats.
Right.
You ended up at 51, but you were sort of the most optimistic out there, and your prediction turned out to be truer than a lot of the other ones.
Yeah.
What's your prediction for this cycle?
Yeah, and we came real close at 52, very, really close in Wisconsin, but no one was mad at me for 51. That was everybody was pretty happy about that, and I'm confident that we're gonna hold the 50 seats that we have. We've got to bring back all of our incumbents. West Virginia is not one that's going to be in play for us. So it's all the incumbents, and Michigan, which doesn't have an incumbent, but was an incumbent state, and we're not going to lose Michigan on my watch. That's not going to happen. We're going to make sure that we keep that democratic for those of you out there. So that gets us at 50, but I have optimism, and I believe we've got a shot in both Florida and Texas, and those are very real. So, as the DS chair, my number one job is to bring all the incumbents back, and they remind me of that just about every week that I'm there. That's my number one job, is to do that. But we also want to make sure we've got a couple extra, although I'm confident that Tim Walz will be in the seat for sure for us to break the tie, but we're going to shoot for at least 51.
When you say you're optimistic about Florida and Texas, are you moving money there yet?
We've made some investments there. We
How
have
much?
On the ground. We've made investments in the ground there.
As a former financial advisor, you kind of know the importance of diversification, shall we say?
Well, that's true. And so we want to make sure we invest because they are very strong potentials for us, but we'll move more money, and we watch it. I watch the data all the time, and just like last cycle when we made history, I mean, there were some states where we were putting money in, but then at the end, just to give you an example, I mean, I knew we could win Pennsylvania, but some of those numbers were getting concerning after the debate, if you recall, and I said, like, every single penny of new money we get, we're going into Pennsylvania, and that paid off because we got to 51.
What's the last date on the calendar that you can flood a state with money?
Well, it gets hard, but with digital you can do that fairly late now. But the on-ground stuff, you need to start making those investments now because you can't just build a structure overnight.
So, and just after Labor Day, flood the market.
Yeah, and but you got to build the infrastructure. So you build the infrastructure, then you get volunteers. The volunteer part, depending on the enthusiasm that's on the ground, you use paid canvassers, so we have money to do that. But the great news now is that we just have incredible energy. I mean, I've done a couple campaign kickoffs for folks, and the number of volunteers that are showing up. In fact, just in Michigan, we've been recruiting for our one campaign, which is for all of our statewide races and our local races. And for a year and a half, we were recruiting volunteers. But by 1 week after President Biden's decision and Kamala Harris in the race, we doubled our volunteers statewide in just 1 week. And that's continuing. And I was at one of the kickoffs. It was a beautiful Saturday in Michigan, it's sometimes hard to get volunteers on a beautiful day because they might want to do other things like the lakes and others, or ride a motorcycle. We had great turnout, a lot of young people, and I would say about half the young people that were there told me it's the first time they ever worked on a campaign.
That's an interesting metric as well, just the volunteer uptick.
Right.
There's a little bit of a chess match between you and your counterpart, Steve Daines. He has Montana. He's salivating over that. Could you rank the states for me on what you think is going to be hardest for your incumbents to protect?
Well, Montana clearly is a tough state for us.
It's tougher than Ohio. Excuse me.
Yeah, Ohio's tough too. So those are both our two tough states, and they're not presidential battleground states. We're not going to see Kamala Harris campaigning in those states. Certainly not in Montana. And so it's on us to do the kind of organizing and the organization that we need. But we got John Tester, who is a guy who just knows how to win. He's as authentic as you can possibly be. If you wanted if you want a central casting character for Montana, it's John Tester. If you've seen the show Yellowstone, I say he's our Kevin Costner. For
Kevin Costner's actually walking around saying, like, I'm kind of the John Tester.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Yeah, that's exactly right.
How much can a Senate candidate, even the testers, even a political athlete like that, how much can they outrun the presidential ticket? What's your back of the envelope sort of number?
Well, I don't have a number, but they can. And especially where the other advantage we have for Montana is that although it's a huge state geographically, population-wise, it's a congressional seat basically. So in a congressional seat, retail politics can matter. You can actually talk. Michigan, I can't talk to 10 million people, but in a congressional seat, and John will tell you, and he's told me, Gary goes, that when I'm back in Montana, I have folks come up to me and say, John, I really like what you're doing. I don't agree with everything you are, but I like you. And he says they're saying that to him now more than they ever have his whole career. So that's another on-the-ground metric.
The only candidate to really outrun the president in the presidential in the last few cycles is Susan Collins. Small state.
Right.
She did by 6 points and just barely, got across the line. But there are not a lot of new arrivals in Maine. There are a lot of new arrivals in Montana. What is the data telling you about who the new arrivals in Montana are? Are they, disaffected Republicans that want to move up to, Kalispell? Are they sort of tech refugees that want to go to Bozeman that are more left-leaning? What are you seeing?
It's really a little bit of both. I don't have an actual metric to be able to determine that. Specifically, it's hard because to get that kind of data there.
What does Tester think? What does his fingertip feel for?
He feels good about that. Folks are coming in, but you have to remember, because of the small number of votes there, 15,000 votes will make the difference in the race. And so that's where you can use that retail politics. I guarantee you he's talked to more than that over the years that he has been there. The other element to turn out vote is the tribal communities. We have a number of tribes there, and have our Native American voters to make sure that they're registered and are voting can make a significant difference, especially on that margin.
Those of us that covered a lot of the tax debates the last few years saw the importance of Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin in sort of determining the size of, how big tax cuts would be, what would happen on the corporate front. If we get to a sort of 50-50 Senate, very close, which Republicans do you anticipate dealing with the most? Who are the Republicans that are going to sort of mirror Sinema and Manchin?
I don't think there's any mirror of those two. So I don't think that's there. It's harder with Republicans because some of the folks that you could work with have left, and they're replaced by folks who are not as easy to work with. So it is becoming more complicated and challenging.
Murkowski?
Well, she's certainly somebody who will work. And Collins, you mentioned Collins too. There are two senators, and Susan Collins is ranked as the most bipartisan senator, so she works across the aisle.
Should every Senate candidate adopt the no taxes on tips policy?
Well, that's up to every Senate candidate to make that decision. I personally think it's a good policy, but we'll see what the candidates do.
Does that fly through? We're going to have a big, and sorry to turn this to go from politics to straight to the 2025 great tax rewrite, but I've got the senator here and we're going to do it. Is that the easiest? Is the taxes on tips, does that fly through? Do you feel like there's bipartisan consensus to make that exempt?
I haven't had a chance to check the temperature of my Republican colleagues, but usually I say nothing is easy that flies through in the United States Senate right now. So we'd have to check the temperature on that.
When we talk more broadly about tax cuts, extending whatever happened during the Trump era. Both Harris and Trump are talking about new rates. Are you at all concerned about deficit spending?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, we have to make sure our fiscal house is in order. We've got to be thinking that through. And it is about priorities. A budget is a priority statement. Where do you set your priorities? Where do you invest money? Just like we do at DSCC, where am I investing the money to get the best bang for the dollar? It's not an infinite source of money, and we can't think of that way with the federal budget as well. And so we have to have those. But, it's a three-legged stool whenever you're trying to deal with a deficit. We got to deal with all three. So the first leg, which is the fun one, is just grow the economy and any kind of policies to do that. But then you probably got to look at not spending. You got to be controlling spending, but you also have to look at revenue. But you have to look at all three. Everybody wants to talk with just two. Either spend more and grow or cut taxes and grow. But we got to be able to do all of them.
What are your biggest revenue targets?
The revenue targets? Well, we're going to look at the tax cuts that Trump put forward, which, as you know, were skewed overwhelmingly for the wealthiest folks, large corporations, everyday folks saw really no tax break whatsoever, and yet it went only for the billionaires and the wealthiest folks and the most successful corporations. And for Democrats, it's like everybody needs to pay their fair share. Let's make sure everybody pays their fair share and make the kind of investments necessary to grow and a middle class as well as grow an economy. And we know that an economy, and we heard President Biden talk about it last night, you grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. The top down stuff never has worked. So we got to get back to understanding who is the engine of growth in our economy, and that's everyday working people.
One final one before we do a couple fun ones.
These aren't fun?
I see people nodding off. They're talking about corporate tax rates.
Taxes really get you going.
What's the one state that you're out there watching where you have a vulnerable that has got a noticeable bump because of Biden being swapped out for Harris?
Other states, Nevada has had a nice bump. Okay. Yeah, we've definitely seen it in Nevada.
So you see it more in Nevada than Ohio? I would think that Cleveland voters might be.
Yes, I mean we'll see that, but I think Nevada, at least from the numbers we've seen, Nevada has been a good change for us.
That's interesting.
But it's helped all across the battleground states. We've seen it. Our candidates were already running above and had great, because it's all about candidate contrast. We have superior incumbents and candidates and deeply flawed Republicans, similar to what we had last cycle. And so you could paint that contrast. And voters are still going in the voting booth. They have to make a decision. They see two individuals on the ballot, and they'll look at the pluses and minuses. And when you have a deeply flawed candidate that you're running against, that's really great. That's really nice. But you still got to run a good campaign. And so that's where the DS comes in. But what we're seing, to use an analogy of airplane maybe, it's a lot better to fly with a tailwind than it is with a headwind, and we got a tailwind right now.
Okay. We're going to not talk about motorcycles because my next question is going to be about bourbon. You and I both.
And those two don't mix.
They don't. We don't. I want to give you plenty of time for that. Best bourbon for value in America.
Well, wow, you're going to give me trouble here. But
no, we can do a Michigan one later. It has to be non-Michigan.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Non-Michigan.
Yeah.
So, my go-to, if it's not Michigan, is Woodford Reserve.
Woodford, not High West.
No, Woodford Reserve.
Okay, most underrated distillery in Michigan.
The one that I have gotten to know very well, and this is really hard question because this is Michigan. They're all wonderful, by the way. In fact, I think we're fifth in the state in micro distilleries, but Traverse Whiskey is one that I particularly like.
Okay.
Traverse City is a great place. Please go visit. It's an amazing, amazing place.
And since you're a border state, best Canadian rye.
Best Canadian, I don't have one.
Good answer. He stuck the landing.
That's easy.
Okay.
Give me some more softballs.
well, Senator, we're out of time this morning, so thank you very much for your time. It was a lot of fun. And just a reminder,